As you drift off to sleep tonight, we'll tell the story of one of the most fascinating people. If our stories help you relax and fall asleep, please subscribe. It would mean the world to us. And now, as you continue to relax, let's begin. Tonight's story is about Rihanna, far above the streets where engines still moved through the night in slow ribbons of white and red light. An apartment remained awake long after most of the city had fallen silent. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting fragments of distant towers and dark ocean water beyond them. Somewhere inside the quiet rooms, a lamp still glowed near a long marble counter, where unfinished papers rested beside a cooling cup of tea. Shoes had been left near the doorway hours earlier. Music no longer played. Even the phones had stopped vibrating for a while. From outside it would have appeared complete. Wealth beyond imagination. Rooms designed with careful precision. Private elevators. Security waiting downstairs in silence. The kind of life millions of people imagine while staring at glowing screens late at night. Yet the stillness inside those rooms carried something softer than luxury. Something heavier too. There are moments, very late at night, when success no longer sounds loud. The cameras disappear first, then the voices from meetings, then the constant movement between airports, studios, fashion events, rehearsals, interviews, launches, and endless conversations about numbers, schedules, appearances, contracts, expectations. Eventually only the quiet remains, and inside that quiet people often return to themselves in ways they cannot during the day. Perhaps that is why the lights in the apartment were still on, not because work had not ended, but because certain minds do not slow easily after building entire worlds around them. The city below continued moving without asking permission from anyone above it. Somewhere in the distance, sirens faded into the night air. Elevators hummed faintly through hidden walls. The ocean breeze touched the edges of open balcony curtains, moving them almost invisibly. Inside the room, the glow from a single screen illuminated stacks of fabric samples and product packaging spread carefully across a long table. Beauty shades, design sketches, marketing notes, tiny decisions connected to companies worth enormous amounts of money. But none of it looked glamorous now. Only quiet. Only work. Only a woman sitting alone after midnight, reading details most people would never notice. For years the world had watched Rihanna through flashes of light. Stadium performances, red carpets, music videos, fashion campaigns, interviews where confidence moved effortlessly through every sentence. Crowds screaming her name loud enough to shake entire arenas. Headlines measuring success in billions. Photos capturing diamonds, gowns, private jets, carefully protected moments of public perfection. But fame often removes the slower parts of a person's life from public view. The long nights, the exhaustion after applause fades, the strange silence waiting at the end of extraordinary days. Sometimes people imagine celebrity lives as endless movement and excitement, as though the noise never stops. Yet many lives become quieter as they grow larger, more protected, more distant. The rooms widen, security increases, conversations become more careful, trust becomes expensive, and after enough years, silence itself can begin to feel unfamiliar. Rihanna's life had once sounded very different from this. Long before the skyscrapers and private entrances and billion-dollar companies, there had been warm air moving through open windows in Barbados, streets carrying music into the evenings, small routines, school uniforms, neighbours who knew each other closely enough to notice ordinary things, the sound of waves existing constantly somewhere nearby, almost like background breathing for the island itself. Back then, nights were smaller, not empty, just smaller. The future had not yet expanded into something impossible. In those years, there were no fashion empires waiting ahead, no beauty industry disruption, no massive global tours, no endless analysis from strangers online, no rooms filled with executives discussing quarterly revenue while photographers waited outside buildings. Only a young girl growing up on an island where sunlight touched nearly everything. The rhythm of Barbados entered people quietly, through music floating from cars, through conversations carried slowly in humid evening air, through families gathering outside after the heat softened, through cricket games, corner shops, neighbourhood laughter, radios playing somewhere in the distance. Life there could feel both vibrant and deeply calm at the same time. And perhaps that balance never fully leaves someone, even years later, even inside penthouses above sleeping cities. There are traces of early life that remain hidden beneath fame, like old songs beneath louder music. Sometimes they appear late at night. The apartment kitchen remained softly lit while most of the rooms beyond it stayed dark. A hallway disappeared into shadows leading toward private bedrooms hidden behind heavy doors. Art lined the walls carefully, expensive but restrained. Nothing inside the space needed to prove wealth anymore. Extreme success often becomes quieter with time. The tea beside the papers had gone cold now, still untouched. Outside the balcony glass, clouds drifted slowly across the sky above the city. In another part of the world, people were just waking up. Emails would already be arriving, teams preparing campaigns, meetings being scheduled, product launches reviewed, music discussions reopened, entire businesses continuing their movement while the night remained still here. Success rarely sleeps completely, especially when built by someone who once had very little control over the direction of life. That hunger can remain long after survival is no longer necessary. And maybe that is one of the quieter mysteries surrounding people who reach extraordinary heights. At what point does ambition finally become still? Or does it simply change shape over time? For Rihanna, work had never belonged only to performance. That became clearer as the years passed. The music made her globally recognizable, but the business world revealed another side entirely. Careful, observant, strategic, patient in ways people sometimes overlooked beneath the public image. While audiences focused on performances and celebrity culture, entire companies were quietly forming behind the scenes. Product development meetings, branding discussions, packaging decisions, marketing strategies, manufacturing details, long hours hidden behind glamorous headlines. Empires are often built in rooms nobody photographs, and many of those rooms probably looked exactly like this one now. Quiet tables, screens glowing after midnight, notes scattered beneath soft lighting while the rest of the world slept. The strange thing about global fame is how easily it can separate a person into versions. Public version, private version, performance version, business version, the version that exists online, the version remembered by childhood friends, the exhausted version seen only very late at night when nobody else is around. Over time, those versions can begin drifting away from one another. Perhaps that is why silence matters. Silence allows certain parts of a person to return. A faint reflection moved across the apartment glass as clouds shifted outside. The city lights below looked almost unreal from this height, like distant constellations rather than traffic and buildings. Somewhere nearby, hidden speakers played instrumental jazz so softly, it almost disappeared beneath the sound of air moving through the room. Luxury often looks colder after midnight. During the day, wealth appears sharp and impressive. Cars arriving, jewellery flashing beneath cameras, staff moving efficiently through polished spaces. But at night, luxury becomes quieter and more human. A blanket resting carelessly across a sofa, half-read notes, dim lighting in oversized rooms. The realization that even extraordinary lives eventually slow into ordinary moments, and those ordinary moments may reveal more than the performances ever could. The fashion industry had taught Rihanna how to control imagery carefully, how lighting changes emotion, how fabric changes posture, how silence can hold power. By the time her beauty and fashion businesses expanded globally, she understood something deeper than appearance alone. People were not simply buying products, they were buying atmosphere, confidence, identity, mood, a feeling attached to a name. That level of influence changes life permanently, because eventually the world begins reacting not only to what you create, but to who people imagine you are, and imagined versions can become difficult to escape. Some nights, after public events ended, she would return to spaces like this where the performance finally stopped. No interviews waiting, no cameras searching for reactions, no stage lights warming the skin, only silence stretching naturally through expensive rooms. Those moments probably felt both peaceful and strangely unfamiliar. There is a certain loneliness attached to becoming globally recognizable. Not always sadness, just distance. Ordinary interactions change. People study your reactions more carefully. Conversations become layered with expectation. Even kindness from strangers can begin feeling complicated because attention itself becomes unavoidable. Privacy slowly transforms into luxury of its own. Perhaps that explains why the apartment felt designed for retreat rather than display. Soft neutral colours, long open spaces, minimal noise, rooms created not for parties but for recovery, places where a person could exist without performing constantly for the world outside. Near the edge of the balcony, city air drifted through the opening in slow waves. Somewhere below, traffic lights continued changing for drivers who would never know who sat awake high above them. The distance between celebrity life and ordinary life can sometimes feel enormous, yet insomnia sounds the same everywhere. A quiet room, thoughts refusing to settle completely, the feeling of time slowing after midnight. Rihanna's path into global fame had happened early enough that adulthood itself unfolded beneath observation. Albums released while still growing personally. Public relationships analysed endlessly. Mistakes documented. Reinventions examined by millions. Entire emotional periods converted into headlines before they fully settled internally. Very few people experience transformation so publicly, and even fewer manage to survive it while building businesses powerful enough to outgrow the entertainment industry itself. That requires a certain toughness beneath the calm exterior, but toughness can become exhausting too, especially after years. The apartment clock moved quietly toward later hours. Somewhere inside another room, a phone screen illuminated briefly before fading dark again. Messages waiting until morning, decisions waiting until morning, entire industries waiting until morning. Yet for now, there was only stillness, and perhaps that stillness carried memories more easily than daytime ever could. Barbados sometimes returned unexpectedly in quiet moments, not as dramatic flashbacks, more like sensations, warm air at night, the sound of distant music travelling through streets, family conversations, simpler routines before fame complicated movement itself, before security teams and private entrances and carefully timed schedules. Childhood places remain inside people differently than later environments do. They become emotional architecture, even after decades, even after becoming one of the most recognisable women on Earth. Somewhere between those early island nights and these silent penthouse hours, an enormous life had formed. Music history, fashion influence, billion-dollar success, motherhood, public fascination spanning generations. Yet human lives rarely move in perfectly satisfying directions internally, no matter how successful they appear externally. There are always unfinished thoughts lingering somewhere beneath achievement, questions without clear answers, feelings difficult to explain publicly, and maybe that is why certain lights remain on long after midnight, not from fear of darkness, but because silence sometimes invites honesty people avoid during the day. The tea had fully cooled now beside the scattered papers. Outside, clouds slowly uncovered part of the moon above the city skyline. Reflections shifted gently across the apartment floor while the music from hidden speakers continued almost invisibly through the room. Everything felt suspended. Not lonely exactly, not peaceful either, just suspended between movement and rest, between public life and private thought, between the woman the world sees and the quieter person who still exists beneath all of it. And somewhere inside that silence, the night continued unfolding slowly. The mornings in Barbados often arrived through sound before sunlight fully entered the rooms, roosters somewhere in the distance, radios beginning to play softly from nearby houses, the movement of cars along narrow streets still carrying traces of cooler night air. Even the ocean seemed louder early in the day, as though waves themselves were waking gradually alongside the island. Long before luxury towers and fashion meetings, mornings began there, in smaller rooms, with simpler routines. The house where Rihanna spent her childhood did not exist inside the kind of comfort people later associated with her name. There were ordinary struggles woven into daily life, tensions that children often learn to notice quietly without fully understanding yet. Bills, stress, adult worries hanging invisibly in the background of conversations, the kind of atmosphere many families carry silently, while still trying to preserve normalcy for children. Yet childhood rarely feels entirely difficult while it is happening. There are always moments of light moving through it, laughter outside after school, friends gathering in warm evening air, music drifting through neighbourhoods, familiar streets that slowly become part of a person's emotional memory forever. Barbados carried music naturally. It lived in shops, passing cars, homes, beaches, street corners. Rhythm did not need formal introduction there. It simply existed around people constantly, shaping movement and mood without announcement. Perhaps that environment mattered more than anyone realized at the time, because certain voices seemed connected to places before they belonged to audiences. As a girl, Rihanna moved through ordinary routines without knowing cameras would someday follow. Nearly every public step she took. School days, conversations with friends, moments of boredom, moments of frustration, quiet dreams not yet fully formed. Fame had not arrived yet to separate life into before and after, and before fame, people still belong entirely to themselves. That may be one of the last truly private periods many celebrities ever experience. In later years, millions would study her confidence carefully, the way she carried herself publicly as though pressure rarely touched her. But confidence often grows from adaptation more than comfort. Children who learn early how unstable life can feel sometimes develop calm exteriors because they must. They observe closely, they adjust quickly, they become emotionally alert without meaning to. Survival teaches certain forms of awareness, and awareness can later resemble strength. The island afternoons moved slowly in those years, heat settling across streets while ceiling fans turned lazily indoors, stores half open, neighbours talking outside, school uniforms wrinkling beneath sunlight. The pace of a life carried a softness different from major cities, where urgency seems attached to everything. There were no global expectations waiting there yet, no endless demand for reinvention, no headlines measuring success against impossible standards, only time moving naturally. At some point during those early years, music stopped being background noise and became something more personal. Not ambition exactly, more like recognition. Certain people discover early that expression changes atmosphere around them. A voice alters a room. A performance gathers attention almost accidentally. Others notice before they do. And once that happens, life quietly begins shifting direction. Still, the distance between local talent and global fame remained unimaginable then. The future often hides itself carefully inside ordinary days. At night, Barbados transformed differently from the cities she would later live in. Darkness there felt softer, less crowded by artificial light. The air remained warm long after sunset, carrying salt and music together through neighbourhoods where people stayed awake outside later than they often do in colder places. There is a kind of closeness island life creates between people and nighttime itself. Nothing feels completely sealed away. Windows stay open. Conversations travel farther. Music reaches houses blocks away. The outside world never fully disappears. Years later, perhaps certain luxury apartments felt too silent by comparison, too closed, too controlled. As a child, Rihanna sometimes watched her mother work hard to maintain stability through difficult periods. That leaves impressions deeper than children usually explain aloud. Watching adults continue despite exhaustion teaches lessons about endurance long before success enters the picture. It reveals how much effort ordinary survival can require. And for some people, that awareness never fully fades after wealth arrives. Perhaps that is why work later became so constant in her life. Not simply ambition, control, security. The ability to never return to uncertainty again. The world often describes billionaire lives through extravagance, But many fortunes are actually built from fear remembered quietly over time. Fear of instability, fear of dependence, fear of losing control over circumstances once controlled by others. Success can become emotional protection as much as achievement. In Barbados, though, none of those future layers existed yet. The world still felt local, reachable, human-sized. Even dreams remained close enough to hold quietly, without announcing them too loudly. There were evenings spent near televisions watching performances from artists who belonged to another universe entirely. Global stars appearing from distant countries through glowing screens. Beautiful lives presented with polished perfection. Audiences cheering beneath lights brighter than anything nearby. It probably felt impossibly far away. And yet distance sometimes collapses unexpectedly in certain lives. The neighbourhood streets where Rihanna grew up were not designed to produce international billionaires. Most places are not. People simply continue living ordinary routines while occasionally extraordinary individuals pass quietly through them before anyone fully realises what will happen later. There is something almost strange about revisiting childhood places after global fame arrives. The roads remain mostly unchanged. The buildings still hold familiar shapes. But the person returning carries entire worlds inside them now. Expectations, public identity, wealth beyond local imagination, histories watched by millions. Meanwhile, childhood streets continue existing normally. Children ride bicycles, neighbours sweep porches, music drifts through open windows. Life continues without fully adjusting to the scale of what one person became. Perhaps that contrast can feel disorienting. During certain nights in later years, maybe memories of Barbados returned not through major events, but through small sensory details. Humid air, distant bass from passing cars, the feeling of warm concrete after sunset, tiny moments connecting enormous present realities back to much smaller beginnings. Memory rarely moves chronologically, it appears emotionally. The apartment thousands of miles away from Barbados remained awake, while the city outside dimmed further into night. Paper still covered the long table beneath soft lighting. Product samples arranged carefully beside handwritten notes. Somewhere deeper inside the apartment, closets held gowns worth extraordinary amounts of money beside comfortable clothes, worn privately when nobody else was around. Public life and private life always existed beside one another now, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. The transition from Barbados into the global music industry happened quickly enough to alter reality, almost before there was time to process it fully. One opportunity leading suddenly toward another. New York meetings, record executives, hotel rooms, flights, conversations about image, sound, potential. Adults discussing futures large enough to change everything. Teenage years becoming business discussions overnight. That kind of acceleration affects people deeply, even when success follows, especially when success follows. Most young people are allowed to experiment privately while discovering who they are. Celebrity removes that privacy early. Every change becomes visible, every uncertainty analysed publicly. Growth itself transforms into spectacle. And yet audiences rarely think about the emotional cost of becoming famous before fully becoming yourself. At first, though, excitement likely outweighed everything else. The energy of entering rooms once unimaginable, seeing cities previously known only through television, hearing professional recordings of her own voice, feeling possibility expand rapidly outward in all directions, the world opening, the future arriving faster than expected. But even exciting transformations contain loneliness inside them sometimes. Leaving home changes people. Leaving home while the entire world begins watching changes them even more. There were probably nights during those early career years when hotel rooms felt strangely quiet after long studio sessions. Cities glowing outside unfamiliar windows. Phones ringing constantly. Adults discussing schedules and branding while exhaustion settled quietly underneath everything. Success begins long before comfort catches up to it, and music industries rarely move gently. The pressure to become memorable arrives immediately. The pressure to remain memorable never fully disappears afterward. Perhaps that is why Rihanna's public presence later carried such control. Calmness becomes valuable when entire industries constantly attempt to shape perception around you. The ability to remain emotionally unreadable sometimes protects people from being consumed by expectations. Still, underneath every carefully managed public image, there remains an actual human nervous system carrying stress privately through ordinary moments, late nights, fatigue, doubt. The silent adjustment required after entering rooms filled with powerful people deciding futures. Back in Barbados, certain family members probably still spoke to her normally during those years, reminding her unintentionally of earlier versions of herself untouched by celebrity machinery. That connection matters. Childhood relationships often preserve identity during periods when fame threatens to distort it. Without those anchors, public life can become dangerously unreal. The world began changing quickly after her first successes arrived. Songs spreading internationally, interviews increasing, attention multiplying faster than privacy could adapt. Suddenly her face existed in places she had never visited. Her voice travelled through stores, clubs, radios, headphones across continents. Fame expands strangely. One day your life belongs locally. The next day strangers everywhere speak your name as though they know you. Most people never experience that transformation, which may be why celebrity culture often misunderstands celebrities themselves. Audiences consume visibility without fully understanding what constant visibility feels like internally. There is exhaustion attached to being observed continuously. Even admiration can become heavy after enough years, and yet success also creates extraordinary experiences impossible to deny. The thrill of performing before thousands, the surreal realization that songs created in studios now shape emotional moments in strangers' lives around the world. The financial freedom once unimaginable, the ability to support family members, to change entire futures, light and pressure arriving together, always together. The apartment remained quiet except for the low music drifting through hidden speakers. Somewhere outside, clouds moved slowly above the skyline while another hour disappeared into night. Luxury buildings across the city showed scattered lights where other people also remained awake for reasons invisible from a distance. Insomnia connects lives more than status ever could. In another room, framed photographs likely captured fragments of different eras. Performances, fashion campaigns, family moments, images from years when life moved too quickly to fully absorb while it was happening. Success documented professionally, while private emotions remained largely hidden outside the frame. Photographs freeze appearances, not internal realities, and sometimes the gap between those two things grows enormous over time. By the time Rihanna's career accelerated globally, she had already learned certain emotional survival skills from childhood: adaptability, observation, resilience beneath softness, the ability to continue moving through instability without revealing every internal reaction publicly. Those qualities later became essential because global fame tests emotional endurance constantly, not only through criticism, but through fragmentation. Different industries wanting different versions of you simultaneously, music executives, fashion houses, journalists, fans, brands, audiences projecting expectations large enough to blur the edges of personhood itself. Eventually people stop asking who you are and begin deciding instead. That may be one reason silence becomes so valuable later. Silence interrupts projection. Silence allows private thoughts to exist again beneath public identity. Somewhere high above the city lights, the apartment remained suspended between past and present. Barbados and billion-dollar boardrooms, childhood memories and luxury isolation, the warmth of island nights, and the colder stillness of towering buildings designed to protect privacy. And inside all of it, a life continued unfolding quietly, long after the world stopped watching for the evening. Before the world learned her name, there were smaller performances in smaller rooms where nobody expected history to begin. School talent shows, casual gatherings, voices rising above ordinary noise for a few brief minutes before life returned to normal again. At the time, those moments likely felt temporary, almost forgettable compared to what would come later. But beginnings rarely announce themselves clearly while they are happening. They hide inside ordinary afternoons, inside nervous excitement, inside small opportunities people almost miss. The transition between childhood and public life can happen so quietly at first that a person does not realize they are crossing into another version of existence until much later. One meeting, one recommendation, one recording session. A chain of decisions slowly rearranging the future while daily life still appears mostly unchanged from the outside. For Rihanna, those years carried movement before certainty, flights becoming more frequent, conversations growing more serious, adults speaking about potential in ways that sounded both exciting and slightly unreal. At an age when most people are still learning who they are privately, she was already entering rooms where identity itself became part of business discussions. Image, sound, marketability, presence. Words that can slowly transform a person into a product if handled carelessly. Yet somewhere beneath those conversations remained a young woman still connected to Barbados, still carrying island rhythms and early memories quietly beneath the pressure beginning to surround her. The music industry during those years moved quickly and demanded constant adaptation. Trends shifted overnight. Executives searched endlessly for the next artist capable of capturing attention long enough to matter. Every label wanted certainty in a business built almost entirely on unpredictability. Young artists entered that world carrying enormous hope alongside enormous vulnerability. Some disappeared quickly. Others survived but lost themselves somewhere inside the machinery. A few managed to reshape the system around their own instincts instead. That last path takes patience people rarely notice at first, because survival in entertainment often looks glamorous externally, while feeling deeply unstable internally. There were probably nights during those early studio years when exhaustion settled into her body long before work actually ended. Producers replaying tracks repeatedly beneath dim lights, headphones pressing against tired ears, the same lyrics performed over and over while adults debated tiny details that audiences would never consciously notice later. Music creation can feel strangely lonely despite being surrounded by people, especially at night. Studios after midnight carry a certain atmosphere difficult to describe unless someone has lived inside them. Darkness beyond the windows, half-empty cups of coffee scattered near soundboards, the faint electrical hum of equipment always running, conversations softening as hours pass, people becoming quieter, more emotionally honest, more fatigued. Time bends differently there. Outside the studio walls, cities continue moving normally. Restaurants close, streetlights flicker across wet pavement. People fall asleep in apartments nearby. Meanwhile, inside the recording room, someone repeats the same melody 20 times, searching for a feeling impossible to explain precisely. Those nights likely shaped Rihanna as much as fame itself later did. Not because they were glamorous, because they required endurance. The world eventually saw confidence, style, precision. But beneath all of it existed years of repetition and adaptation, invisible to audiences consuming the finished product. Success stories often appear smoother in hindsight than they actually felt while unfolding. There were uncertainties, pressure, moments when entire futures probably seemed unstable despite outward momentum, and still, the work continued. The apartment overlooking the city remained softly illuminated while distant traffic glowed below like rivers of moving light. Somewhere near the kitchen counter, business notes remained untouched for the moment. Fashion samples cast long shadows beneath warm lighting. The quiet inside the room felt almost suspended, as though the night itself had slowed to observe something carefully. Perhaps fame always begins this way, not with celebration, with long periods of invisible effort. There is a particular loneliness attached to becoming recognizable, while still emotionally unfinished. People begin responding to your image before you fully understand your own identity. Compliments arrive, expectations increase, public reactions shape private confidence in complicated ways, and once audiences begin paying attention, ordinary mistakes stop feeling ordinary. They become headlines, comment sections, public narratives written by strangers. In those early years, Rihanna's public image carried youthfulness mixed with a calm confidence that audiences immediately noticed. But confidence on camera does not necessarily mean comfort off camera. Many performers learn quickly how to control perception externally, while privately struggling to keep pace with the speed of their own lives. The entertainment industry rewards composure, even when composure is expensive emotionally. Flights between cities became routine. Hotel rooms blurred together. Interviews repeated similar questions beneath slightly different lighting each time. Hair and makeup teams preparing appearances while schedules tightened further around every passing month. Sleep shrinking, expectations growing. There are moments during rapid success when life stops feeling fully inhabited and begins feeling managed instead. Someone else controls transportation, someone else controls timing, someone else controls access to your own attention. The self slowly becomes scheduled. Perhaps that is why late-night solitude later became so important in her life. Silence offers temporary escape from constant visibility. A return to unstructured existence, even briefly. During the earliest phases of fame, though, silence was probably rare. Everything moved too quickly. New songs arriving, new opportunities, new pressure. The world beginning to watch more closely with every release. Audiences often imagine celebrity growth as a smooth upward climb, but public visibility actually creates strange emotional distortions. Praise and criticism arrive simultaneously at enormous scale. One room celebrates you while another dismisses you entirely. The human brain is not naturally built to process millions of opinions constantly. Yet performers must continue functioning beneath all of it. Smiling through interviews, stepping onto stages, maintaining presence even during exhaustion. Some nights after performances ended, Rihanna likely returned alone to hotel suites, still carrying the physical energy of crowds inside her nervous system. Adrenaline fading slowly while silence filled the rooms again. Shoes abandoned near doorways, makeup partially removed beneath bathroom lights, city skylines stretching beyond curtains in unfamiliar countries. The contrast after concerts can feel almost surreal. Thousands of voices screaming your name 1 hour, absolute silence the next. Human emotions do not transition between those extremes easily. Perhaps that is why certain artists continue working endlessly. Motion itself becomes easier than stillness after enough years inside public life. Stillness allows delayed emotions to surface. Fatigue, isolation, questions difficult to think about during busy schedules. The apartment air carried traces of ocean humidity drifting faintly through the balcony opening. Somewhere below, the city continued thinning into deeper night, while lights disappeared one by one across neighbouring buildings. Inside the quiet room, papers remained scattered across the table like unfinished thoughts, waiting patiently until morning. Luxury can soften discomfort, but it cannot erase emotional complexity. By the time Rihanna's early songs gained international attention, public fascination had already begun shaping itself around her image. Fashion magazines noticed her. Interviews multiplied. Industry conversations shifted from possibility towards certainty. Executives no longer wondered whether she might become famous. Now they wondered how large the fame could become. That change alters relationships quickly. People begin approaching differently once success appears inevitable. Attention becomes more strategic. Praise becomes less trustworthy. Genuine connection harder to identify beneath ambition. For young artists especially, that transition can feel disorienting. Childhood friendships still exist beside entirely new worlds, filled with powerful strangers speaking confidently about money and influence. The emotional distance between those realities widens fast. And somewhere inside all of it, a person still tries quietly to remain themselves. The music itself became both opportunity and burden over time. Songs opened doors impossible to access otherwise. They created freedom, wealth, recognition. Yet they also trapped parts of her life permanently inside public memory. Entire emotional eras became associated with singles, albums, performances replayed endlessly for audiences who experienced them as entertainment rather than lived reality. Music preserves moments people may eventually outgrow internally. But audiences rarely allow those moments to disappear. That permanence can feel strange. Imagine hearing younger versions of yourself constantly projected back at you across years. Voices recorded during emotional periods long finished privately. Memories turned into commercial success. And still, despite everything fame complicated, there remained genuine beauty in the work itself. Certain performances created connection impossible to fake. Music travelled across borders and languages, attaching itself to strangers' lives in deeply personal ways. Songs became part of people's memories, relationships, heartbreaks, celebrations. That kind of influence carries weight beyond money. Even late at night after meetings ended and cameras disappeared, perhaps there remained awareness of how deeply her voice had entered the lives of people she would never meet personally. Fame isolates. But art connects. Those two truths often exist together uneasily. The years before superstardom fully solidified now probably seem distant when viewed from enormous penthouses overlooking sleeping cities. Yet traces of those earlier years likely remain embedded in everyday habits. Work ethic formed through uncertainty, emotional caution developed during rapid change, the instinct to keep moving professionally even after achieving levels of success few humans ever experience. Because once survival and ambition become connected internally, rest itself can feel unfamiliar. The apartment lights reflected softly against the dark balcony glass while the music from hidden speakers continued almost invisibly beneath the silence. Somewhere deeper inside the rooms, expensive wardrobes rested behind closed doors, untouched tonight. Awards, photographs, fragments of different eras carefully stored away from public view. Objects documenting extraordinary success, yet objects themselves remain quiet, perhaps quieter than the person living among them. Outside, the city stretched endlessly toward darkness, while somewhere far away Barbados slept beneath warmer skies. Different worlds connected through one life, now divided between memory and magnitude. And somewhere between those worlds, the night continued unfolding slowly, carrying the distant echo of a young voice that once entered a recording studio without fully understanding how much of life would change afterward. The first years inside the music industry often feel less like arrival and more like acceleration. One successful song creates another opportunity, then another flight, another interview, another city waiting beneath airplane windows before sunrise. Life begins moving too quickly for reflection, as though momentum itself becomes a force stronger than personal choice. For Rihanna, those years unfolded beneath increasing brightness. Songs climbed charts internationally, crowds grew larger, cameras multiplied outside hotels and venues, magazine covers appeared faster than they could fully be processed emotionally. Entire teams formed around her schedule while public attention expanded into something impossible to ignore. And still, much of the work happened at night. Studios after midnight, rehearsals beneath harsh lighting, conversations about image and sound stretching into early morning hours. The entertainment world rarely sleeps properly, especially when it discovers someone capable of becoming globally magnetic. There is something strangely isolating about performing for enormous audiences. Thousands of people may feel emotionally connected to you while knowing almost nothing about your actual private life. They project stories, emotions, fantasies, assumptions. Over time, those projections gather around celebrities like weather systems difficult to escape. And the larger the audience becomes, the more complicated silence can feel afterward. Perhaps that is why hotel rooms after performances carried such strange emotional weight during those years. The transition from overwhelming noise into sudden stillness can unsettle the nervous system deeply, 1 hour spent beneath blinding stage lights while music vibrates through entire arenas. The next hour spent alone removing jewellery in front of quiet mirrors, while room service trays cool untouched nearby. Adrenaline fading slowly, thoughts returning, exhaustion settling into muscles that still remember movement. The world saw glamour, but glamour often contains fatigue hidden carefully beneath it. During tours, nights blended together across countries and time zones, airplanes replacing ordinary routines, sleep becoming fragmented, familiarity disappearing. Entire weeks measured only through performances and departures rather than natural rhythms. Some cities likely existed only as glimpses through tinted car windows between airports and arenas. Fame compresses experience strangely. People travel constantly while seeing very little. The backstage areas before concerts probably carried their own ritualistic atmosphere. Makeup brushes arranged beneath bright mirrors, stylists moving quickly through narrow hallways, security teams communicating quietly through earpieces, distant bass vibrating through walls while crowds gathered outside long before doors opened. And somewhere in the middle of that controlled chaos, Rihanna preparing herself to become visible again. Public performance requires transformation. Even confident performers often step into stage presence deliberately, almost like entering another emotional state. The body straightens differently. Facial expressions sharpen. Energy rises despite exhaustion. Private thoughts temporarily disappear beneath professional instinct. Then the lights explode across the stage, and thousands of strangers scream simultaneously. There are very few human experiences comparable to that level of collective attention. For some artists, it becomes addictive. For others, overwhelming. Perhaps for most, both feelings exist together. The apartment remained quiet while distant thunderclouds drifted slowly beyond the skyline. Reflections from neighbouring buildings moved faintly across polished floors. Somewhere near the balcony, a curtain shifted softly in the night air before settling still again. Inside the silence, traces of earlier years seemed almost easier to imagine. The pressure surrounding Rihanna's public image intensified rapidly as fame expanded. Success in the music industry rarely allows stillness for long. Once audiences respond strongly, industries begin demanding constant reinvention to maintain attention. New sounds, new aesthetics, new eras. The machine continues moving whether exhaustion exists or not, and audiences often mistake adaptation for ease. But reinvention can become emotionally expensive over time. Every album cycle required decisions extending far beyond music itself. Fashion direction, public appearances, interviews carefully balancing openness and mystery, collaborations negotiated strategically, entire narratives constructed around releases before audiences heard a single note. The artist gradually becomes both creator and product simultaneously. That duality can blur identity in unsettling ways, especially at a young age. There were likely nights when Rihanna sat awake after interviews replaying certain answers privately, wondering which version of herself audiences believed most strongly. The confident one, the playful one, the guarded one, the glamorous one. Public figures often become collections of interpretations rather than singular people, and once millions participate in those interpretations, reclaiming privacy becomes extremely difficult. Yet despite increasing visibility, she maintained a kind of emotional distance publicly that fascinated people. Not coldness exactly, more like control, a refusal to fully surrender inner life to constant observation. That restraint may have protected her through years when celebrity culture consumed vulnerability aggressively, because fame can reward openness while simultaneously punishing it. The balance becomes dangerous. Music videos during those years transformed her image repeatedly. Different aesthetics, different moods, different versions of femininity presented beneath dramatic lighting and carefully constructed worlds. Audiences watched these transformations constantly, often assuming they revealed personal truths rather than creative experimentation. But performance and identity rarely overlap perfectly. Artistic imagery can conceal as much as it reveals. Behind the polished visuals existed ordinary human routines mostly invisible to the public. Long waits between shoots, early call times before sunrise, endless travel fatigue, quiet moments staring through car windows between obligations, conversations with close friends late at night after public energy finally faded. Those private spaces matter more than audiences usually realize. They preserve humanity beneath visibility. Without them, celebrity life can begin feeling entirely performative, even internally. Perhaps that is why Rihanna later built environments around herself, emphasizing privacy and control, secure homes, trusted circles, carefully limited access. After years of constant observation, silence itself becomes a form of luxury impossible to purchase fully no matter how wealthy someone becomes. Still, even protected spaces cannot entirely remove public expectation. Phones continue glowing, news cycles continue moving, entire industries continue depending on your decisions. The weight of being globally recognizable follows people into quiet rooms eventually, at night especially. There were moments during those rising years when the future probably felt almost too large to comprehend realistically. Success escalating faster than emotional processing could fully keep pace with it. Wealth accumulating beyond childhood imagination. Influence expanding internationally while personal life became increasingly fragmented by schedules and scrutiny. Human beings are not naturally designed for that scale of transformation, which may explain why so many famous people seem simultaneously powerful and emotionally fragile beneath the surface. The music industry rewards charisma publicly, while often neglecting emotional stability privately. Yet Rihanna survived environments that consumed many others, not perfectly. No one survives fame perfectly, but with enough self-possession to eventually shift power dynamics around herself, rather than remain controlled by them entirely. That transition matters. At first, industries shape artists. Later, certain artists begin shaping industries instead. The early signs of that evolution appeared gradually. More confidence in public interviews, greater experimentation visually and musically, a stronger sense that she understood the machinery surrounding fame without fully surrendering to it anymore. Awareness replacing innocence, control replacing adaptation. And perhaps beneath all of it, a growing realization that success alone would never create peace automatically, because peace and success are separate pursuits entirely. The apartment clock moved further into the night, while scattered city lights continued disappearing below. Somewhere inside another room, a television screen glowed silently before timing out into darkness. The entire space felt suspended between wakefulness and exhaustion, as though sleep remained nearby but unreachable for now. Luxury homes often feel largest after midnight. Their silence expands, footsteps echo differently. Even beautiful rooms can begin feeling emotionally distant when nobody else is awake. Perhaps that sensation visited her sometimes, after returning from performances where attention had felt almost physically overwhelming. The contrast between public intensity and private stillness can create emotional whiplash, difficult to explain to anyone living ordinary routines. How does the nervous system fully settle after entire stadiums vibrate with your name? Maybe it never does completely. Maybe certain people remain partially awake internally forever afterward. During interviews, Rihanna often appeared composed in ways that concealed the relentless pace beneath her lifestyle. Audiences saw confidence, humour, elegance, rarely the logistical exhaustion surrounding global celebrity existence. Flights timed precisely, security coordination, endless obligations extending far beyond music itself. Public life becomes infrastructure eventually, a machine requiring constant maintenance, and machines do not pause easily. Still, somewhere inside all the movement remained quieter moments invisible to cameras. Listening to unfinished tracks alone late at night, looking through old photographs from Barbados, calling family members between flights, sitting silently in dark cars after events ended while cities blurred past outside the windows. Tiny fragments of ordinary humanity surviving inside extraordinary circumstances. Those moments may matter most in the end. Not the headlines, not the awards, just the private spaces where a person briefly reconnects with themselves beneath all external noise. Outside the apartment, clouds finally released light rain across parts of the sleeping city. Tiny droplets streaked softly against the balcony glass while distant streets reflected silver beneath traffic lights. The sound remained faint from this height, almost peaceful. Inside, the room stayed warm and dim, still awake, still carrying the quiet tension between immense success and whatever emotions continue existing after applause fades away completely. And somewhere inside that silence, the story kept moving slowly forward into deeper night. There are nights after major, performances when the body remains awake long after the mind wants rest. Adrenaline moves too deeply through the nervous system to disappear quickly. The music has ended, the crowds have gone home, stadium lights shut down one by one. Yet somewhere inside the performer, the noise continues, echoing faintly for hours. Perhaps Rihanna knew those nights well. The elevator doors closing behind security teams, hotel hallways finally quiet. Jewellery removed carefully onto marble counters beneath soft lighting. Silence arriving slowly, almost cautiously, after enormous public energy. People often imagine fame as constant excitement, but excitement without recovery eventually becomes another form of exhaustion. The human body cannot remain elevated forever. Even extraordinary lives eventually return to ordinary biological realities. Fatigue, restlessness, loneliness, the need for silence after too much stimulation. And silence can feel unfamiliar to those who spend years surrounded by noise. By the time Rihanna's career reached its highest global intensity, performances had become events larger than music alone. Entire productions travelling across countries, stage designs requiring massive crews, choreography rehearsed endlessly beneath mirrored studio lights, clothing changes timed down to seconds, lighting cues programmed precisely enough to control emotion inside arenas filled with strangers. The scale of modern celebrity often resembles architecture more than artistry. Huge systems built carefully around one visible figure. Yet at the centre of those systems remains a single human being moving through all of it physically, emotionally, mentally. That part is easy for audiences to forget. The backstage atmosphere before performances probably changed over the years. Early excitement gradually replaced by ritual and discipline. Warm-up routines, quiet concentration, trusted voices nearby. The understanding that millions of people now expected consistency, precision, presence. Success creates pressure through repetition. Once audiences witness greatness, they expect it again every time. And every performer eventually feels the weight of that expectation somewhere privately. There were likely moments standing alone just before walking onto stages when time slowed briefly. The distant roar of crowds vibrating through walls, stage managers counting seconds quietly, heartbeats sharper than usual despite years of experience, a final breath before stepping into blinding light once again. Then, music exploding outward, thousands of phones rising simultaneously like artificial stars. The modern concert experience transformed over Rihanna's career. Audiences no longer simply watched performances, they documented them constantly. Every gesture captured, every expression replayed online within minutes. Public life became permanent in ways earlier generations of performers never fully experienced. Nothing disappeared anymore. Mistakes survived digitally. Triumph survived digitally. Entire emotional periods archived endlessly by strangers. That permanence changes behaviour over time. Perhaps it encourages greater control, greater caution, a stronger boundary between public and private self. Still, even carefully controlled celebrities cannot entirely prevent emotional truth from surfacing occasionally during performances. Certain songs carry memories too deeply. Certain nights feel heavier than others. Exhaustion reveals itself subtly through posture, voice, pacing. Human vulnerability always exists somewhere beneath performance, no matter how polished the exterior becomes. And audiences often connect most strongly during those imperfect moments, because imperfection feels real. The apartment lights reflected softly against rain-streaked balcony glass, while distant thunder moved farther across the city. Somewhere near the kitchen counter, one of the papers shifted slightly beneath the air drifting through the room. The atmosphere felt suspended between luxury and solitude, between accomplishment and fatigue. Late-night spaces often reveal truths daytime conceals. The public image surrounding Rihanna during her peak performance years projected confidence so consistently that many people likely assume pressure affected her less than it actually did. Confidence becomes part of celebrity mythology. Audiences want stars to appear larger than ordinary emotional limitations, but pressure accumulates quietly even inside highly composed people, especially when careers evolve into global phenomena. The demands extended far beyond concerts themselves. Fashion weeks, brand partnerships, interviews across multiple countries, public appearances requiring perfect presentation regardless of personal exhaustion. Entire days scheduled minute by minute while millions continued consuming the resulting images casually through screens. At some point, celebrity schedules stop resembling human rhythms entirely. Sleep becomes fragmented, meals become logistical, silence becomes rare. Yet Rihanna appeared to understand something important earlier than many public figures. Visibility alone does not create lasting power. Ownership does. Control does. The ability to shape industries rather than simply participate in them. That awareness slowly changed the direction of her life. Even during intense music years, there were signs her attention extended beyond performance: interest in branding, presentation, audience psychology, the emotional relationship people formed with products and identity. While many celebrities focused only on maintaining visibility, she seemed increasingly interested in building structures that could outlast trends themselves. Perhaps that instinct came partly from understanding how unstable fame can be. Music careers rise quickly. Public attention shifts quickly. Industries move on quickly. Creating something durable requires another kind of thinking entirely. Still, during those touring years, life remained dominated by motion. Airplanes waiting at private terminals before sunrise, security escorts moving through crowded airports, luxury suites temporarily inhabited then abandoned again within hours. Entire cities experienced only through brief fragments between obligations. There is loneliness hidden inside constant travel. No matter how beautiful the destinations become, hotel rooms especially can begin feeling emotionally strange after enough years. Expensive but temporary, perfectly arranged yet entirely impersonal. Curtains drawn against unfamiliar skylines, staff entering quietly to refresh spaces that never truly become lived in. Luxury without rootedness. Perhaps that is why certain performers eventually crave home environments, emphasizing comfort over spectacle. Soft lighting, familiar routines, privacy strong enough to allow genuine relaxation, not performance, just existence. Some nights after events ended, Rihanna probably remained awake, scrolling through business updates, or listening to unfinished tracks while entire cities slept beyond enormous windows. The transition from public adrenaline into private stillness rarely happens smoothly. Thoughts continue moving. Decisions continue waiting. Creativity continues arriving unexpectedly. And for highly driven people, rest itself can begin feeling unproductive. That tension shapes many successful lives. The inability to fully stop even after reaching extraordinary heights. Because ambition often survives long after necessity disappears. Outside, the rain softened gradually into mist drifting across the skyline. Reflections shimmered on wet streets far below, while the city quieted further toward morning. Inside the apartment, the dim atmosphere remained almost cinematic in its stillness. A blanket folded carelessly over one side of the sofa, a half-open notebook beside scattered samples and sketches. Tiny signs that someone actually lived here beneath all the luxury surrounding them. Public imagination often turns celebrity homes into museums rather than personal spaces. But real life eventually softens every environment. Even billionaire spaces contain ordinary moments, unfinished tea, fatigue, silence stretching through hallways after midnight. During performance years, Rihanna's relationship with the public grew increasingly layered. Fans felt emotionally close to her through music and visibility. Yet she also maintained distance, protecting certain private parts of herself. That balance fascinated people, accessible and untouchable at the same time, a difficult balance to sustain. Because audiences constantly ask celebrities for more intimacy than fame naturally allows, more access, more explanation, more emotional transparency. Yet total openness under global observation can become psychologically dangerous. Perhaps instinctively, she understood that mystery preserves sanity sometimes. Not every thought belongs to public consumption. Not every feeling benefits from being translated into headlines. So portions of her life remained hidden deliberately, quietly protected behind composure. The performances continued growing larger regardless. Bigger stages, greater influence, more wealth, more recognition. Entire generations associating specific periods of their own lives with songs connected to her voice. Music embedding itself into culture deeply enough to outlive trends. That kind of success changes time perception. A person stops existing only in the present and begins existing inside collective memory simultaneously. Past eras remain alive publicly forever, and maybe that creates strange emotional disorientation privately. Different versions of yourself surviving continuously in public imagination, while internally you continue changing, aging, evolving quietly beyond them. The apartment clock drifted toward early morning now. Somewhere outside, the first faint signs of dawn waited hidden behind clouds not yet ready to break. The city below moved more slowly than before. Fewer headlights, longer stretches of darkness between buildings. Inside the silence, the atmosphere carried something unresolved but calm. Not sadness exactly, more like the awareness that even extraordinary success cannot fully quiet the deeper parts of a human life. The search for rest, the search for meaning beyond applause, the search for a place where performance finally ends completely. And somewhere high above the sleeping streets, that quiet search continued softly through the night. As the years passed, fame stopped feeling temporary. At first, global attention can seem almost unreal, like weather passing through someone's life unexpectedly. Magazine covers arrive, crowds grow larger, songs travel farther than imagination once allowed. But eventually there comes a moment when a person realizes the world is no longer briefly observing them. It has permanently attached itself to their image. For Rihanna, that realization likely arrived gradually through accumulation rather than one dramatic event. Airports becoming impossible to move through unnoticed. Security no longer optional. Private moments transformed into public conversation before the day even ended. Entire industries organizing themselves around her presence. Visibility settling into permanence, and permanence changes the emotional texture of fame completely. There is a difference between becoming famous and remaining famous long enough to understand its cost. The apartment overlooking the city remained dim and silent while the rain outside finally stopped completely. Moisture still clung to the balcony glass, distorting distant lights into soft, abstract shapes. Somewhere deeper inside the rooms, a phone screen illuminated briefly again before fading back into darkness. The night continued holding its breath. By this point in her life, Rihanna's public image had expanded beyond music into something larger and more symbolic. She no longer represented only songs or performances. She represented confidence itself for many people, reinvention, beauty, independence, a certain refusal to shrink beneath expectation. That level of cultural influence creates strange pressure because audiences stop responding merely to work. They respond to meaning projected onto the person, and projected meaning becomes difficult to control entirely. The fashion world embraced her differently than the music industry once had. Fashion values image instinctively, presence, emotional atmosphere, the ability to shift perception through appearance alone. Rihanna understood that language naturally. She knew how stillness could communicate power just as effectively as spectacle. Photographers noticed it immediately, the way she entered rooms without appearing to seek approval from them. That quality fascinated people because true ease under constant observation is rare, or at least the appearance of ease is. Behind public composure, the pace of life kept intensifying. Meetings stacked upon appearances, creative decisions multiplied daily, expectations expanded in every direction simultaneously. Music audiences wanted albums, fashion audiences wanted innovation, business partners wanted growth, media outlets wanted access, the public wanted endless visibility. And somewhere inside all of it, an actual human nervous system continued carrying fatigue quietly through long nights. Perhaps that is why her homes increasingly reflected restraint rather than extravagance. Spacious but calm, elegant but controlled. Environments designed to soften overstimulation instead of increasing it. Soft textures, warm lighting, neutral colours, privacy built into architecture itself. Not spaces for display, spaces for recovery. Late at night, luxury homes often become deeply introspective places. Without daytime movement, enormous rooms reveal their emptiness differently. The silence stretches farther. The distance between objects becomes more noticeable. Even beautiful spaces can begin feeling emotionally hollow when someone sits awake alone inside them long enough. Maybe that is one of the hidden contradictions of extreme wealth. The larger life becomes externally, the more carefully people must protect intimacy internally. Otherwise, everything starts echoing. There were likely evenings after major fashion events when Rihanna returned home, still carrying traces of performance energy beneath exhaustion. Makeup partially removed beneath bathroom mirrors. Jewellery resting in small piles beside sinks. Assistance and security finally gone for the night. The silence afterward almost startling compared to the cameras and voices from hours earlier. Public life rarely fades gradually. It stops abruptly. One moment, attention everywhere. The next moment, only quiet rooms and private thoughts again. During those years, her understanding of power seemed to evolve beyond celebrity itself. Fame alone no longer appeared sufficient. Ownership mattered more now. Building systems rather than simply participating inside systems built by others. That shift changed everything. Because ownership creates distance from dependence. And perhaps independence had always been one of the deeper emotional pursuits beneath all the success. Not simply money, freedom, the ability to move through life without needing permission constantly from industries, executives, or expectations. The beauty empire she built reflected that evolution clearly. It was not treated like a side project attached casually to celebrity status. It carried precision, long-term vision, attention to emotional detail, understanding not only products, but how people wanted to feel while using them. Confidence marketed carefully through atmosphere. The business world noticed quickly because authenticity in branding is difficult to manufacture artificially. Audiences can sense when someone actually understands the emotional language they are speaking. Rihanna understood it intuitively. Yet behind every successful launch existed countless invisible hours. Meetings after midnight, product testing, campaign revisions, financial discussions, creative disagreements hidden far away from magazine covers and social media celebration. Empires are often built quietly while the public focus is elsewhere. The apartment air had grown cooler now. Somewhere outside, the first delivery trucks probably moved through lower streets preparing the city for morning. But high above them, the night still lingered stubbornly inside the softly lit rooms. Perhaps sleep remained distant again. Highly successful people sometimes struggle with stillness because their minds become trained toward momentum. There is always another idea waiting, another opportunity, another problem requiring attention. Even rest becomes interrupted by possibility. And possibility can be exhausting after enough years. Still, certain moments likely pierce through the machinery occasionally. Quiet family conversations, laughter without cameras nearby. Music played casually rather than professionally. Memories from Barbados returning unexpectedly through scent or weather, or certain songs heard late at night. Fragments of earlier identity surviving beneath global scale. Those fragments matter. Without them, public life can become emotionally disorienting, almost unreal. The relationship between Rihanna and public attention also changed as she matured. Younger fame often invites constant explanation. Audiences demand access to thoughts, relationships, emotional reactions. But over time she seemed to grow more selective with visibility itself, more protective, more aware that mystery can preserve humanity better than overexposure ever does. That restraint likely confused certain parts of celebrity culture accustomed to constant availability. But perhaps silence had become necessary for survival, necessary for identity, necessary for remembering the difference between the public figure and the quieter person existing underneath it all. There is something deeply tiring about being interpreted continuously by millions of strangers. Every appearance analysed, every expression discussed online, every absence transformed into speculation. Even praise can begin feeling invasive when observation never fully stops. People imagine fame as being seen, but sometimes fame feels more like being consumed, and consumption leaves very little untouched over time. The city beyond the windows had nearly emptied now. Only scattered headlights moved through wet streets reflecting pale gold beneath streetlights. Inside the apartment, the table near the kitchen still held business papers arranged beside fabric samples and handwritten notes. Work waiting patiently for morning. Always more work. Always another decision somewhere ahead. By this point in life, Rihanna likely understood something many ambitious people discover eventually. Success does not remove inner questions. It simply changes the environment where those questions continue existing. Doubt survives inside penthouses just as easily as inside small apartments. Loneliness survives inside luxury. Exhaustion survives achievement. Human emotions adapt to circumstances but rarely disappear completely. Perhaps that realization deepened her relationship with quietness itself, not as emptiness, as refuge. The fashion industry especially can feel emotionally loud even when physically elegant. Endless presentation, endless image construction, endless subtle competition beneath polished surfaces. To survive inside those environments without losing psychological balance requires strong internal boundaries, and boundaries often look like distance from the outside. Maybe that is why certain interviews carried a calm guardedness in her voice over the years. Not disinterest, protection. The understanding that constant emotional exposure eventually fragments people under public scrutiny. So some parts remained hidden. Some thoughts kept private. Some nights existed entirely beyond cameras. Those private nights may have mattered more than the public triumphs eventually. Sitting quietly with trusted people, walking through dark rooms after events ended, looking out over sleeping cities while wondering whether rest would arrive before sunrise. Simple moments, human moments, moments untouched by branding or expectation. Outside, the clouds finally began thinning enough for faint traces of early dawn to appear somewhere beyond the skyline. Not sunlight yet, just a softer darkness slowly replacing the deeper blue of night. The apartment remained awake inside it, still quiet, still suspended between enormous success and the softer, unanswered feelings that continue existing long after the world decides someone has everything. And somewhere within that stillness, another chapter of the night unfolded silently toward morning. Money changes the sound of life before it changes anything else. Doors close more softly. Elevators move privately instead of crowded with strangers. Cars glide through underground entrances where cameras wait outside but cannot enter. Hotel staff learn names before arrivals. Security teams speak quietly into hidden microphones, while entire floors remain inaccessible to anyone else. Luxury creates distance first, then silence, and after enough years, that silence becomes its own atmosphere surrounding a person everywhere they go. By the time Rihanna's business empire expanded into billionaire territory, her life had entered a scale difficult for most people to imagine clearly. Not only wealth itself, but the infrastructure surrounding wealth. Teams managing schedules across multiple industries, lawyers reviewing contracts deep into the night, designers, executives, assistants, security personnel, creative directors, financial advisors, entire systems orbiting around decisions connected to her name. Yet even enormous systems eventually become quiet after midnight. The apartment still glowed softly while the city below drifted closer toward dawn. Somewhere in the kitchen, A refrigerator hummed faintly beneath the silence. The business papers on the table remained untouched for now, though their presence alone seemed to carry invisible pressure through the room. Success rarely sits completely still, especially success built personally rather than inherited. There is a particular intensity surrounding self-made wealth, because it often carries emotional memory inside it. Early instability, childhood uncertainty, fear of losing momentum, the awareness that everything now existing once seemed impossibly far away. Perhaps that awareness never entirely leaves people, even billionaires, maybe especially billionaires. The beauty empire changed Rihanna's relationship with public identity permanently. Music had made her famous, but business transformed her into something more structurally powerful. Fame can disappear, trends can fade, but ownership creates another level of permanence entirely. That shift altered how industries viewed her. No longer simply performer, no longer simply celebrity, now builder, architect, decision-maker. And power changes solitude too. Because with greater control often comes greater responsibility hidden beneath public admiration. Entire companies depending on judgment, employees depending on leadership, expectations extending far beyond personal success into systems affecting thousands of lives. People celebrate wealth publicly, while rarely considering the psychological weight accompanying it privately. Every major decision carries consequences outward into enormous networks of people and money. And those decisions often happen quietly in rooms exactly like this one. Long after cameras disappear, there were likely countless nights when Rihanna sat reviewing business strategies while the rest of the city slept below her windows. Product launches requiring adjustments, marketing campaigns needing approval, financial projections glowing softly across screens in otherwise dark rooms. Not glamorous moments, important moments. The kind of work audiences rarely associate with celebrity because it lacks spectacle. But real power often looks surprisingly quiet, just concentration beneath dim lighting while everyone else sleeps. Luxury fashion and beauty worlds operate through emotional perception as much as products themselves. Atmosphere matters, timing matters, identity matters. Rihanna seemed to understand instinctively that people were not only purchasing cosmetics or clothing, they were purchasing emotional possibility, confidence, expression, belonging. That understanding helped separate her businesses from ordinary celebrity ventures designed only around visibility. There was intentionality behind the branding, inclusivity presented not merely as marketing language, but as emotional recognition audiences deeply responded to. The world noticed, and the empire expanded quickly afterward. Still, rapid expansion creates its own exhaustion. More meetings, more responsibility, more pressure hidden beneath polished success stories. Wealth multiplies complexity alongside comfort. Entire days disappear into decisions invisible to the public. And after enough years, even extraordinary achievement can begin feeling strangely procedural internally. Another launch. Another negotiation, another interview asking variations of the same questions. The human nervous system adapts surprisingly fast to luxury, which may explain why peace itself remains difficult to purchase regardless of wealth level. The apartment carried the stillness of spaces designed carefully against intrusion. Thick walls muting outside sound, warm indirect lighting softening sharp architectural lines. Expensive materials arranged with restraint rather than excess. Nothing inside the room needed to announce value loudly anymore. Extreme wealth often becomes quieter over time, not because it loses power, because it no longer needs validation. Perhaps Rihanna herself changed similarly. Earlier fame carried brighter energy, more visibility, more movement toward public attention. But billionaire status seemed to bring another emotional layer entirely. Greater calm externally, greater distance, more selectivity about access to personal life. Maybe success eventually teaches people how exhausting constant exposure truly is. There were likely evenings after major business victories when celebration felt strangely muted compared to public expectation. Headlines announcing record valuations, while privately she simply sat exhausted after months of work leading toward them. Achievement often feels quieter internally than outsiders imagine, especially once success becomes familiar. The first breakthrough changes life emotionally. After that, victories become part of ongoing maintenance, and maintenance never fully ends. Somewhere deeper inside the apartment, closets held pieces from different eras of her life. Performance costumes, fashion archive pieces, clothing connected to moments the public remembers vividly now. Entire phases of identity preserved physically inside carefully controlled spaces, objects carrying memory silently. Perhaps occasionally she looked at certain pieces and remembered emotional realities. Audiences never saw surrounding those public moments. Fatigue hidden beneath confidence, anxiety beneath glamour, loneliness beneath applause. The external image survives. The internal experience remains mostly private forever. Outside the windows, the city's darkness softens slightly more. Early morning workers now moved through streets far below, while luxury towers remained mostly asleep. The contrast between those worlds probably felt impossible to ignore sometimes. Ordinary life continuing beyond extraordinary circumstances. No matter how wealthy someone becomes, mornings still arrive for everyone eventually. And morning light has a way of making even luxurious environments feel more emotionally honest. Perhaps that is why some thoughts surface most clearly just before dawn. The billionaire lifestyle surrounding Rihanna likely appeared perfect from the outside. Private jets, exclusive events, fashion influence reaching globally, homes designed with breathtaking precision, access to nearly anything money could provide. Yet perfection itself can become emotionally distancing. When life grows highly curated, spontaneity often disappears first, then anonymity, then simplicity. Eventually, even ordinary experiences require planning and protection. That trade-off rarely appears in public fantasy surrounding wealth, but it exists quietly underneath. There is loneliness in never fully entering a room unnoticed again. Loneliness in questioning motives around you constantly. Loneliness in realizing privacy has become one of the few things money still struggles to protect completely. Perhaps that is why certain nights stretched long inside these quiet spaces, not because luxury failed, but because human beings remain emotionally complicated regardless of circumstance. The deeper parts of existence do not disappear through success. Questions remain, memories remain, restlessness remains, and sometimes success itself creates entirely new forms of emotional distance impossible to anticipate earlier in life. Still, there were likely genuine moments of satisfaction too, seeing ideas once imagined privately become globally real, watching businesses reshape industries, creating opportunities for others, supporting family, building security impossible during childhood years in Barbados. Achievement matters, freedom matters, the ability to direct one's own life after years of external pressure matters deeply. But perhaps freedom also creates unexpected quietness once finally achieved. Because after spending years climbing towards something enormous, people eventually face another question silently waiting underneath ambition. What now? The apartment remains suspended in that pre-dawn stillness where night has not fully ended but morning already approaches invisibly. The city below shimmered faintly beneath thinning darkness. Somewhere nearby, the first birds had probably begun waking, though their sounds could not yet reach this height. Inside the softly lit rooms, luxury and solitude existed together without contradiction. A billionaire life after dark, beautiful, controlled, successful beyond imagination, and still carrying the same quiet human search for peace that no amount of wealth has ever fully solved for anyone. Luxury becomes most visible in silence, not during parties or fashion events or carefully photographed arrivals beneath flashing lights. Those moments belong partly to performance. Real luxury reveals itself afterward, when the doors close and the night finally settles around a person without interruption. A quiet hallway lit softly near midnight, bare feet crossing warm marble floors, expensive rooms carrying no sound except distant air moving through hidden vents. The feeling of space large enough that footsteps echo slightly when someone walks alone through it. By this stage of Rihanna's life, Silence had likely become both comfort and complication at the same time. The apartment overlooking the city remained suspended between darkness and dawn. The business papers still rested untouched across the long table, though the room itself no longer felt connected to work entirely. The atmosphere had softened into something more reflective now, as though the night was slowly peeling away the public layers surrounding success. There are moments late at night when people stop performing even for themselves. Those moments are rare and perhaps priceless. The world surrounding Rihanna's image had always emphasized visibility. Fashion campaigns magnifying beauty into art. Public appearances analysed instantly across social media. Entire industries depending on spectacle and attention to survive. Yet behind all that brightness existed another life moving quietly away from cameras. The private life, the invisible hours, the spaces where identity becomes less polished and more human again. People often imagine billionaires living in constant stimulation, endless entertainment, limitless excitement. But many highly successful lives eventually become deeply structured instead. Controlled environments, predictable security systems, carefully chosen social circles, protected schedules designed to reduce chaos. Too much unpredictability becomes dangerous once visibility reaches a certain scale, and so life narrows gradually around safety and trust. Perhaps that narrowing creates a certain emotional stillness over time. Not emptiness exactly, more like distance from ordinary spontaneity. There were likely nights when Rihanna sat alone near open windows listening to the city below, while remembering earlier periods of life that felt emotionally louder in different ways. Barbados evenings filled with neighbourhood sound, early career years packed with movement and uncertainty, studio sessions stretching endlessly through youthful ambition. Now the world around her had become quieter externally, yet perhaps more complicated internally. The silence inside luxury homes often carries hidden emotional texture. During the day, these spaces feel impressive. Architectural perfection, carefully selected art, designer furniture positioned precisely beneath controlled lighting. But after midnight, large rooms become strangely vulnerable places. They reveal loneliness differently. Not dramatically, subtly. The larger the space, the more noticeable absence can become. Maybe that is why certain corners of the apartment felt warmer than others. A blanket folded casually on one chair, a half-finished notebook near the kitchen counter. Tiny signs of actual living softening environments designed with immense precision. Human traces matter inside controlled spaces. Without them, luxury can begin feeling emotionally cold. Outside, the sky had shifted toward a deeper silver blue now. Dawn still hidden, but approaching steadily somewhere beyond the skyline. The city below remained mostly quiet except for occasional headlights, drifting through wet streets left shining after the rain. Inside, the atmosphere felt almost suspended between memory and wakefulness. By this point in life, Rihanna had likely mastered the art of selective visibility. The world saw enough to remain fascinated, but never enough to fully access her inner life. That boundary became one of her quietest strengths. In an era where public figures often surrendered everything to constant exposure, she maintained mystery carefully. Perhaps mystery preserves identity, perhaps privacy protects sanity, or perhaps certain emotions simply cannot survive under endless observation. There is exhaustion attached to being emotionally available for public consumption continuously. Interviews demanding vulnerability, audiences expecting intimacy, media cycles transforming private experiences into entertainment almost instantly. Eventually, many people stop explaining themselves entirely, not because they have nothing to say, because peace becomes more valuable than clarification. The beauty and fashion world surrounding Rihanna's empire operated through constant visual perfection. Campaigns polished down to microscopic detail, photos edited carefully, product launches timed strategically across global markets, every public image carrying intention behind it. But perfection is difficult to live inside permanently. Real human life remains softer than branding, more uncertain, more unfinished. Perhaps that contrast became clearest during late-night hours, after work stopped completely, when makeup disappeared, when expensive clothes were replaced by comfort, when no cameras remained nearby to interpret expression or posture or silence. Just a woman moving quietly through enormous rooms while the rest of the city slept. The world often forgets celebrities' age emotionally through public attention rather than outside it. Every era of Rihanna's life unfolded beneath observation. Youth, success, relationships, reinvention, business evolution. Motherhood eventually approaching the horizon of her identity too. Most people process change privately. Celebrities process change publicly while strangers narrate it for them in real time. That constant interpretation can become emotionally disorienting after enough years. Maybe silence became necessary simply to hear her own thoughts clearly again. There were likely evenings when she intentionally avoided noise altogether. No interviews, no music playing, no meetings. Only stillness stretching naturally through the apartment, while city lights flickered distantly beyond the glass. The nervous system eventually craves recovery after prolonged exposure to intensity. And celebrity life is intensity sustained unnaturally long. During certain quiet nights, perhaps the luxury itself faded emotionally into background texture. Marble countertops, skyline views, expensive fabrics, designer architecture. These things stop feeling extraordinary once lived inside daily. The mind adapts quickly to comfort. What remains afterward are simpler emotional realities. Who feels safe around you? Who remembers earlier versions of you? Whether rest actually arrives when the lights go out? Whether silence feels peaceful or unsettling? Those questions survive every financial level. The apartment's lighting now seemed softer as darkness continued thinning outside. Reflections across the polished floor shifted subtly, while the city prepared invisibly for morning. Somewhere below, bakery workers and delivery drivers had already begun their routines long before luxury towers fully awakened. Ordinary life continuing beneath extraordinary wealth. That contrast likely never disappeared completely from Rihanna's awareness. Barbados remained somewhere inside her emotional memory regardless of success scale. The warmth of ordinary evenings, family conversations, simpler forms of closeness untouched by global visibility. Childhood places often become emotional anchors. People revisit internally when life grows too large. Perhaps certain scents or sounds still returned her there instantly even now. Warm ocean air, music drifting through open streets. The feeling of being known personally rather than publicly. There is comfort in being remembered from before the world arrived. The business empire surrounding Rihanna may have granted control unavailable during earlier career years, but control itself carries emotional cost. Responsibility expands. Trust becomes strategic. Time fragments between obligations impossible to pause completely. And the more powerful someone becomes publicly, the fewer places remain where they can exist casually. That may be one of fame's quietest losses. Casual existence. The ability to disappear briefly into ordinary life without consequence. Maybe that explains why late-night solitude carried such emotional significance. In silence, performance loosens. Public identity softens slightly. The nervous system stops bracing against attention for a while. Not fully, never fully, but enough to breathe differently. Enough to remember smaller versions of life beneath all the scale surrounding it now. The city skyline outside had begun receiving the faintest traces of early dawn along its edges. Buildings once hidden completely in darkness now revealed subtle outlines against the brightening horizon. Morning approached carefully, almost reluctantly. Inside the apartment, the night remained alive a little longer, still quiet, still thoughtful, still holding that strange emotional balance between immense success and the softer human longing for something quieter than success itself. And somewhere inside those dimly lit rooms, surrounded by beauty, wealth, achievement, and silence, another sleepless hour passed gently into dawn. Dawn does not arrive suddenly in cities like this. It spreads slowly, first as a thin change in colour behind glass towers, then as a soft lifting of darkness from the edges of buildings, then as reflections on wet streets begin to lose their deeper shadows. The night does not end so much as it dissolves. Inside the apartment, the difference was subtle at first. The same quiet rooms, the same soft lighting. But something outside had shifted, and that shift changed how everything inside felt. By this point in the night, or early morning, the business papers on the table no longer felt like work waiting to be done. They felt paused, like thoughts temporarily set aside rather than responsibilities demanding urgency. The silence around them had softened into something more neutral, less heavy, less structured, more human again. Somewhere in that quiet transition between night and morning, Rihanna's world likely existed in that in-between space where identity becomes less public and more private again. Not the performer, not the brand, not the global figure built through years of visibility. Just a person moving through a large, quiet space while the rest of the world slowly begins to wake. There is a different kind of loneliness in early morning compared to midnight. Midnight feels endless. Early morning feels temporary, as though everything is about to begin again. The apartment windows reflected the first faint signs of sunrise now, turning glass into a soft gradient of grey and pale gold. The city below was still mostly quiet, but movement had started to return in small invisible ways. Lights turning on in distant buildings, early workers beginning their routines, the faint suggestion of another day forming beneath the skyline. Inside, Rihanna's private world remained still. But stillness at this hour is different. It carries transition inside it. Not conclusion, not continuation. Something in between. Perhaps this is the part of the day where the mind begins to loosen its grip on the past few hours, where thoughts that were sharp and repetitive begin to soften, where the weight of decisions, creativity, memory, and responsibility slowly separates itself from immediate awareness. And what remains is something quieter, more internal, less shaped by the outside world. There is a kind of emotional honesty that sometimes only appears when exhaustion and early light meet in the same space, the kind that does not form sentences or conclusions, but instead exists as sensation, awareness without structure. For someone who has lived most of life in visibility, those moments may feel especially rare. No cameras, no audience, no expectation of performance, just existence continuing without interruption. The luxury surrounding Rihanna's life, its architecture, its privacy, its scale, was designed to protect exactly this kind of moment. Not the public version of success, but the private recovery from it. Yet even protection does not remove complexity. It only contains it. Inside containment, thoughts still move, feelings still shift, memory still arrives without permission. A person can be surrounded by everything they ever built and still sit quietly at a table wondering nothing in particular, or everything at once without needing to explain it to anyone. That is often how real stillness works. Not empty, just unspoken. The light outside strengthened slightly now, enough to begin outlining the distant city more clearly. Buildings that once looked like dark shapes were becoming structures again. Roads separating into visible paths. The world regaining definition after hours of abstraction. Inside the apartment, the transformation was gentler. Shadows did not disappear. They simply softened. At some point in lives shaped by constant movement, music, travel, performance, business, sleep is not only rest, it becomes a negotiation between control and surrender. And people who live at this scale often develop complicated relationships with that surrender. Because surrender means letting go of momentum, letting go of awareness, letting go of everything still waiting unfinished. But eventually, even the most driven minds reach a point where the body begins making decisions the mind cannot override. Rest arrives, not as permission, but as necessity. And in that quiet threshold between wakefulness and sleep, identity loosens again, not in a dramatic way, in a gradual one. Thoughts slow, breathing deepens, the weight of the day, or night, no longer holds its previous structure. Outside, the city now clearly belonged to morning. Inside, the apartment belonged to silence, and somewhere between those two worlds, Rihanna's life, public, private, immense, human, remained briefly suspended in calm stillness that no audience could fully observe and no achievement could fully replace. Not happiness exactly, not sadness either, just the quiet continuation of being. The kind that exists after everything else has stopped speaking. And for a moment, before the world fully returns again, there is only this, a vast life resting gently inside a quiet room as morning finally begins to take shape. Morning finally arrives the way it always does, without permission, without announcement, without waiting for anything inside the room to be ready for it. The light grows stronger across the skyline. The glass windows shift from reflective darkness into clarity. And slowly the apartment that belonged to night begins to belong to day again. Inside, silence does not disappear. It changes form. It becomes lighter, less enclosed, less introspective. The same rooms that felt suspended a few hours ago now feel grounded again, as if the world outside has gently pulled them back into its rhythm. Somewhere deeper in the apartment, life begins to restart in small ways. A phone screen lights up briefly with early notifications. A distant reminder appears on a calendar. A quiet signal that the world has continued moving forward while the night remains still here. But nothing demands urgency yet. Not immediately. This is the softer edge of morning, the space where time has returned, but pressure has not fully arrived. For someone like Rihanna, whose life exists across music, fashion, business, and constant global attention, mornings likely carry a different kind of structure. Not chaotic, not loud, but layered. Each hour already assigned meaning before it fully begins. Yet even in that structure there is always a moment, however brief, where nothing is required. No performance, no decision, no direction outward, just awareness returning gently to the present. The city below is now fully awake. Traffic begins to build into patterns. Sunlight reflects off buildings in sharper angles. Life resumes its visible motion. But high above, in rooms designed for privacy and separation from that motion, the contrast is still noticeable. Morning here does not feel rushed. It feels delayed, as though the apartment itself takes longer to rejoin the world outside. In that delay there is space, and in that space thought becomes softer again. There is something quietly revealing about how the morning feels after a night like this, after success, responsibility, memory and silence have all shared the same hours. The mind does not reset completely. It simply reorganizes. What felt heavy at midnight does not disappear. It settles. What felt distant becomes slightly closer again. And what was hidden in silence remains unspoken, but not forgotten. This is often where people like Rihanna exist most privately, not in the moments of performance or public visibility, but in the transitions between them, the hours when identity is not being shaped by external attention, the hours when everything slows enough for reflection to exist without interruption. Outside, the skyline is now fully defined. Glass towers reflect morning light in clean geometric patterns. The city feels structured again, predictable, forward-moving. Inside, the apartment feels almost the opposite. Soft, still, inward-facing, a space temporarily removed from urgency. There is a quiet truth in lives built at this scale. The higher the visibility, the more carefully moments like this must be protected. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are rare. The world rarely pauses for people like her, so pause must be created elsewhere. In architecture, in distance, in silence, in late hours that stretch beyond expectation, and in early mornings that arrive before responsibility fully begins again. Perhaps that is why nights like the one just past feel less like time passing and more like time reclaimed. A brief return to something unstructured, something personal, something that does not exist for audiences, industries, or headlines. Just a human being existing without interpretation. Now, as light fills the apartment more fully, that fragile space begins to fade again, not in a sudden way, but in the slow return of obligations, thoughts, and awareness of the day ahead. But something remains, a residue of stillness, a quiet, emotional afterimage of the night, not loud enough to name, not sharp enough to define, just present enough to be felt, the kind of feeling that does not interfere with success, but quietly exists beneath it. And as the morning continues to unfold across the city, that feeling stays behind in the soft corners of the apartment, waiting for another night when everything slows again and silence returns, not as absence, but as something closer to truth. And somewhere within that ongoing rhythm, night dissolving into morning, public life into private reflection, the story simply continues without needing to end.